Rototom Sunsplash, Reggae University 2019. Welcome back. Bienvenidos un año más. And we are here, 26th edition of Rototom Sunsplash, and it's our 13th edition of the Reggae University. And as most of you know, we chair these panels jointly. So to your far right, my left, we have the broadcaster Pier Tosi broadcasting in radio stations in Bologna, Italy and Kingston, Jamaica. We have Alan Collins and Pete Lilly from Rhythm Magazine, the longest running publication of reggae in Germany. And we have our special guests. Please welcome Brinsley, Forde and Martin Stellman. Welcome to our Reggae University. Now, Brinsley and Martin, we're hoping, we've just seen this extraordinary film, Babylon, a landmark piece of cinema coming from Britain with a black British theme and a reggae background.
Well, David, sorry to butt in, but I'm hoping that most of you have seen Babylon before. Is that true?
Yeah,
because I was a little bit worried because the light was coming in and it was very dark. But if you've seen Babylon before, okay, fine. Because we were going to switch roles and pretend he was me, but never mind. Anyway.
Okay, so most of you... Yeah, go ahead.
The whole thing.
Okay, Martin.
Okay, so can you enlighten us a bit, each of you, about how did the film Babylon come about? What was the intention? What was the film really trying to express? And then how did Brinsley Forde end up in the lead role?
Shall I start?
This is Martin Stellman, co-writer of the movie Babylon. And my good friend Idris Elba called him to write Yardi. So here we are. Martin Stellman.
Yeah, also, sorry, should just mention we were expecting Dennis Bovell on this panel. Due to late arrival of his flight, he is not with us, but we're going to make do with what we've got. So Martin, come forward, tell us all about it.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for coming. The story is quite a long story, so I'll just try and keep it brief. We're talking about the kind of second half of the 70s, and I'm working as a youth and community worker. You probably call it a community organizer kind of thing in Deptford, which is southeast London, rough area, going through some quite difficult economic times. And I was working with some kids, and some of those kids had this thing called a sound system, which I knew nothing about. What I knew about was Mali. I love reggae music, and they said, we're going to do a sound clash this weekend. So I said, what's that? And they explained it to me. I was 25 at the time, probably 26, 27, and they were about 18, 19, that sort of age. Anyway, so I got introduced to the wild and wonderful, fantastic world of reggae music, and of course the reggae that I'd been listening to on my little stereo suddenly became just something completely different. This was just in another universe entirely, another galaxy. And I then, because I was working also as a journalist, I wrote a piece for a magazine called Time Out, which was about young black London, really, which I couldn't really claim to be an expert on, but I kind of knew something about through my work. And a guy called Franco Rosso, who was at the time a filmmaker, was working on an excellent documentary about, I think, the Mangrove 9, the Mangrove 8, who were a group of Afro-Caribbean British guys in Notting Hill Gate, who were being hassled in their restaurant, which is called the Mangrove. Anyway, this is a really terrific documentary that Franco was making, and also he had been working on a documentary about Linton Kwesi Johnson. And out of the blue, I don't know how he did it in those days, because there was certainly no internet, and I don't know, he was probably, pretty ingenious in getting hold of me, but somehow he got hold of me and said, I really like the article that you wrote, I thought it was fantastic, you seem to have captured something, would you be interested in working on a movie with me? So that's basically the start of it. And the only other thing to add about it that's really important is that Franco's only experience of sound systems was because there was a sound system at the bottom of his garden, because there's his garden, then there's a fence, and then on the other side of the fence is a church hall, where every Friday night and Saturday night, 2, 3 in the morning, right? And he had a couple of little kids, so, they were keeping his kids awake, so he went down there initially to have a go at the people and say, would you please turn the music down, and just kind of got, fascinated by the scene, started asking people questions, and got more and more sucked into it. And that was his experience of it. Anyway, so we guys came together and, started working on the script. And obviously, when we started working on the script together, we were very aware that he's an Italian, I'm a first-generation son of Jewish immigrants, so we're kind of, we're not, it's not exactly our own territory, so we needed to be very respectful of what we were trying to do. So I made sure that we got our kids very much involved, the kids who are in my group, to help us with, not so much with the structure of the story, but getting the dialogue right and the situations right. And then you were asking me about Brinsley, so...
Yeah, so Brinsley Forde, how do you end up in the lead role as Blue in this film?
Well, as it goes with any movie, you're called in by either the casting director. Fortunate for myself, it wasn't the casting director, it was the director and the writer. And we spoke for a while, and the rest is really history. They offered me the role, and I was really glad to accept it. I had been acting for quite a few years as a child actor, and at that time, if you can imagine, in the early 80s, there's no parts for any black actors. And one thing I have to say, that watching the film, I've watched the film, there was a premiere in New York just the other day. A lot of the movie, there was a structure, but Franco and Martin and Gavrick allowed, you had young black actors and you had people who had never acted before. But, they have the swagger, they have the style, and it's just come out in the movie, and no matter how many times I see the movie, there's something that just makes me smile, makes me laugh. So respectfully, as Martin's just said, they allowed the actors to create their characters and bring out that realism, and I think that's what you see every time you see Babylon.
So, yeah, I think you've touched on something there. When we see the film, you're an obvious natural for the part. At the same time, you were talking about your experience as a child actor. Can you enlighten the people here that may not know some of that history? What were you appearing in, what kind of stuff, and how did you begin to act as a young person?
How did I begin? I mean, it was literally, I was asked by my mother to go and pick up my sister from this hall that was called Beryl Hall. It's a Jewish hall. And I walked in, the woman looked at me and says, "Can you sing?" I was a little bit stupid, so I said yes. Anyway, she did a lot of shows for charity, and I ended up singing some shows for her. And she got me my first audition. This woman turned out to be the mother of Mike Hurst. Many people may remember the Springfields, a group from back in the day. Anyway, this led me to a TV program.
Sorry, you mean the Springfields that Dusty Springfield
Like
came out
Dusty
of?
Springfield, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
But this audition led to a show called The Double Deckers, that many people, probably in England, it was the first time you saw kids in a role. This was early 70s. And I did The Double Deckers, went on to things like Please Sir, Diamonds Ever, the James Bond movie, lots of different other things. But one thing that, I really believe in the father and believe in his direction. This hall was also the first place that I played reggae music to an audience, as in a group. Bob Marley and the Wailers were staying less than 200 yards from this, well, no, it was further than that, but from where I lived in Neasden. And I ended up at the house and used to jam with them. This was, remember Johnny Nash and the Sons of the Jungle? Well, the Wailers, this was at the point where they had Family Man and Carly from the Upsetters. And they were in England to support Johnny Nash, but they couldn't get a work permit. So I took my guitar amp and speakers over there, and we used to jam. And one night, George asked them to do a show, and for some reason, they didn't turn up. But the Cimarrons had all their equipment, and this was the first place in this same hall that I played reggae music to a live audience. Don't know why, it was just something I had to mention. But,
Could I just add something? I think it's really interesting that, in a way, Babylon exists in a kind of weird vacuum, because you had this movie come out in the UK in 1980. And, as David just said, a fantastic, masterful performance from Brinsley, and also 2 or 3 other really exceptional performances from the members of the ensemble cast, and yet no continuity in terms of the talent that was shown in this film. None of those guys really had the kind of opportunities that maybe are just now only available to actors of color. Certainly it seems to me that throughout the whole of the 80s and nearly all of the 90s, there was really very, very little. You won't have seen these actors again, and I think that's a real shame,
Yes, it brings to mind there's so many things involved in this film, because you've got the music. So, track is called?
That track's called Hey Ya Children. And the vocal version has never really been released. But I'm going to do it tonight.
Okay.
Because we perform tonight, so I'm going to do it tonight.
So it was a song that Aswad had recorded, but for some reason you just put the dub on there?
No, what actually happened, Dennis Bovell, it had been agreed to do the soundtrack. And I mean, it is an absolutely fantastic soundtrack. But remember, I was a member of a group. So it was like, I remember we were in one session where I think we were talking about, we were talking about the actual, what was happening, and discussion with the actors. I remember one of the actors wouldn't believe that the police would come in and stop a dance and bring dogs in. And I think you had to get something for Ronnie to see. Sorry, I'm calling him by his stage name. That this actually happened. There was a documentary that came in. So I kind of pulled rank a little bit, and I'm saying, no, but we have to do some music for this movie. And I can't remember if it was Martin or if it was Franco. Said, all right, look, because they were afraid of mutiny. They said, look, okay, your band does the dub for this, right? Dennis is doing the soundtrack, and you do the dub for it. So, I mean, they were getting me to come, especially after the scene where I get beaten up. I had to come in really early in the morning, like 5 o'clock for makeup. And then after we finished working, about 6 or 7 maybe, I would go to the studio and work all night. And 2 tracks that we did for the movie was Hey Ya Children. I mean, I don't know if you're waiting to play the other one, or can I talk about it?
We are indeed, but go ahead, and then we'll get to that.
Okay, so the second one was Warrior Charge. Now, one of the great things is that when Shaka heard this, Shaka said, what is that? And it actually did what it was supposed to do in the film, because Shaka was won lots of cups with it. But the point I'm trying to make, we had done the track that night. It hadn't been mixed. No one else had heard this. And on the call sheet, it said, we are doing the scene in the lockup, where Archie says, if that get one scratch, you know that scene? Would you believe that no one had heard the song? When we did that scene, no one had heard the song, right? And I'm there going, you see me doing this? I'm remembering, I'm going, and everyone started dancing. That scene, there's no music in the scene. No music at all, right? So, yeah, it just happened. And what it was supposed to do in the film, it's done in real life. So I give thanks for that.
Also, you got to remember that the, I mean, the way he's talking about it, like, going to makeup and all of that, it sounds like this is kind of, a movie, like a movie in Hollywood. Well, we're kind of sailing by the seat of our pants, on a very, very shoestring budget most of the time. So I was reminded today, looking at the film, that, and this will tell you something about the kind of budgetary restrictions that we were under. There's a drive-by in it. That's me driving by my second-hand car, and in the scene where he's having a row with Mel Smith in the garage. There's a blue car on the which he wants him to fix. Well, that belonged to the cinematographer. That was his car. So that's kind of, that's what we were working under, basically.
You see, what the advantage that you had that you didn't realize, I mean, extras on the film, right? How would you like to get paid to go to a dance all day? You just go in first thing in the morning, and you have Shaka playing, and all day you're in a dance. It's like, Herb, everything is going on, man. So we enjoyed it.
Okay, so since you mentioned the Great Warrior Charge, we've got to play it. track 2 coming up. And just so you know, Brinsley, the mic remains open should you wish to use it.
Through the inspiration of His Imperial Majesty, Haile Selassie I of Ethiopia.
Queen Lion!
I'm leaving it for tonight.
Lion! Lion!
Can't take no more of that. Bong say we can't take no more of that. Bong lady say we can't take no more of that. Ow! Can't take no more of that. GCEMEFGSLG. Can't go to work, I have to feed my family. Every night me have a hungry belly, but I'm just seeing the band coming in. Big up, enough respect. Can't take no more of that. Say we can't take no more of that. Bundle say we can't take no more of that. Come again.
Nice one.
One thing, let me say, because I know it's legal. I don't smoke anymore, but every spliff in that movie was a real spliff. No word of a lie. It was so much fun because before a scene would start, I would go, continuity. I had a spliff, and it was and so I would. But what happened, the scene with the chalice? I don't even know if Martin knows this, right? But the scene with the chalice, it was always something in the back of my mind. I have to draw this chalice because my brethren, them are going to see this. So the first one, it was like, smoke everywhere. Franco said, do it again. Okay, so I did it again. Do it again. And believe me, I did this about 5 or 6 times until it got to the point where the kutchi was burning. I was tasting the wood, and it was like... And then Franco told me, you're not supposed to know how to smoke a chalice. So I went home that night like flying high in a friendly sky, believe me.
Yes. Well, I think that's the thing, you're reminding just that Babylon has that undeniable stamp of authenticity about it. So, Martin, tell us a little bit about when you were putting the script together, what did you really want to get across, and then how did that manifest in the making of the film?
Well, I guess one of the hidden stories of the script is that we had a much bigger story in terms of scale, because we had a whole second half which was set, because the ending that you see was not ended in the script that we originally wrote. It carried on with the inevitable result from that, which is that Blue is arrested by the police and ends up in a Borstal. That's a kind of youth prison in East Anglia. And so the whole of the second half was about his experience in this youth prison. And it ended with him somehow making an escape, kind of becoming more and more Rastafarian, more and more influenced by, I guess, that scene that you were just talking about.
Because really, it was compressed into a week, but there was lots of scenes that maybe people hadn't seen. Because the night when Blue leaves to where he gets chased by the police, we filmed the scene where he has this argument with Ellie, and you realize that Ellie's going one way, Blue is going the other way. And I think a lot of those scenes were taken out. I mean, even because of the problems with the certificate, because obviously they wanted to give it an X. And I think they were saying, unless he's seen being sorry for what he's done in prison, you know. And I mean, the recording script that we did, or that was written, right, was the police came in and there was a line, the police and the you know, the youths in the club. And Blue walks back to the sound system, right, and goes to put on a thing, and then you see a bottle flying overhead and smashes, and that's where... So in the film, there's lots of things that happen that you probably don't see, which I think is what Martin is explaining.
Well, yeah, and not just the, you know, the smaller things that you're talking about, but a huge, great wodge of like 45 minutes of script, which ends with Blue, did you know this, escaping from the prison, walking onto the beach, because this particular youth prison was next to a beach. It actually exists. It's called, can't remember the name. Anyway, it's up near Norwich somewhere, and he walks onto the beach and he sees a boat, and he decides to head for Ethiopia. And when we were talking to the financiers, they were saying, you know, it's too long, we've got to make cuts here, we've got to make cuts there, the budget is this, so we decided to end it where we ended it. And funnily enough, there was another movie, another Borstal movie, that kind of deals with racism as well, that was around at the time, called Scum. I don't know if you know it. Anyway, so what else can I tell you about the script? Oh, how we worked it. Well, at least, you know, and some kind of fixed points. So, and you need, it's almost like mountaineering, you know, you need to kind of know where you're going to, you know, you're going to put your, whatever those things are called.
Crampons or whatever.
Yeah, not tampons, that's something else. Yes. Anyway, so, yeah, and so we had that, we kind of had those. But we felt we needed to really expand on that, and in order to do justice to it, we needed to know that we were telling the truth, because authenticity was absolutely our watchword. Because if we were not going to be authentic, it seemed to us that we were going to be on a, you know, doomed mission, really. And actually, it's worth saying that one of the influences on us was a movie that we both absolutely, you know, were passionate about, one of Scorsese's, if not his first movie ever, Mean Streets. I don't know if you know Mean Streets. It's like De Niro's first performance, and we wanted the film to have that quality of authenticity. Obviously, that scene, that whole Italian working class scene in New York, was something that you know, that he knew very well. But we were coming at it, you know, from the outside, so we needed to make sure that it didn't feel like we were coming from the outside.
Let's dance. People were jumping and prancing and bouncing. It was just love. It was just crazy. It was wild. And I'm happy to say that the young warrior, Shaka's son, is just continuing it, you know.
Wow.
But something I just want to say to what you said. Shaka being a sound system, I think played as himself. But I believe that every single person that worked on it, whether they were actually professional actors or, you know, people that were given an opportunity, took it 100% serious. You know, I don't think you can go in and play a scene as yourself. I think the difference was that we had lived the life. All the people in the movie, they knew that kind of life. This was probably the first time that it had been seen on screen. But you can ask lots of people, yeah, they came out with things, but they'll say, well, like my Uncle Frank, you know, my Uncle Frank go on, so when he does that or when he does this. I think for the people there, I will say we all took it serious. This was something we were doing. Even the character of Blue, for me, it was Blue. It wasn't myself, you know? So I think that's an important thing. And I think that makes the difference because everybody gave their heart and soul to it.
Can I just add to that, that applies, what Brinsley was just saying, applies to the cinematographer, Chris. Because he wanted to know, Chris Menges subsequently went on to win 2 Oscars for Killing Fields, and I can't remember the other movie. But, he was so dedicated that he wanted to know exactly what the light was like in a blues. And the fact of the matter is, there ain't no light in the blues. So, he's recreated that. That's what he did. He got into the absolute detail of getting how it looks and feels in the middle of a blues in a dance hall.
I honestly think if that had been a Hollywood movie, he would have got an Oscar for it. I mean, it was difficult today, but if you've seen the movie, as we just said, it's dark. You know what a blues is like. But you see everything. And the quality and the work that Chris put in, I think it was an amazing job. I've not seen anything else that technically has been that challenging. And I think he's pulled it off.
It's absolutely borderline. The light is absolutely just right on the edge, and that's probably why, unfortunately, this afternoon you couldn't see a lot of the movie. But anyway.
But there was a lot of frankincense. Wasn't it frankincense that he used? That stuff.
Yeah.
But I suppose that was all to do with the visuals of it. But yeah, I want to give a round of applause for Chris Menges.
Yes. So in a few minutes we're gonna go to question and answer. So the audience will get your chance to put your questions to our special guest. So I invite you all to put your thinking caps on. But I have a question and I know my co-panelists have some questions as well. But I'll just ask a question before I pass it over to you. And obviously, if Dennis were here, he could enlighten us a bit more. But from what I understand, that the key scene at the end with the warrior charge and what happens with the police, if I'm not mistaken, it's based on a true incident. So I'm wondering if either of you can shed any light.
Okay, a question. Remember Sufferer Sound? Sufferer Sound, you have to come northwest London, really. But Sufferer Sound, Dennis played Sufferer Sound in Metro. Anybody remember Metro? Well, Dennis was the DJ at Sufferer Sound. But this took place at Burton's Cricklewood. Anyone remember Burton's Cricklewood? Okay. Well, the situation when the police came in, they said they were looking for someone something had happened. And they said that Dennis had instigated a riot. He was convicted. It was a case this would have been in the late 70s.
Yeah.
Late 70s. And it went on, they charged people, Dennis was charged, and he would give you the full story. But it was one of those cases that fortunately Dennis won. But after spending time in prison, it's the old story, that police create their version. Obviously, each police officer has their, version documented, and Dennis had to go through the situation. But I believe that some of that scene was based on that.
I think that Franco had been working with Dennis previously on one.
Yeah, because Dennis obviously is the producer for Linton Kwesi Johnson.
Exactly.
So
Okay.
yeah.
Yes. Come in, Eleanor, please.
You talked about the authenticity of the music, how the music is presented in the movie, but how did the social realities reflect, Brinsley, especially your own life?
Well, I mean, I think really while you're doing this or while you're living it, you don't really kind of see it because it's just everyday life. You know, this happens, that happens. But earlier this year, there was a premiere at the BAM, which is in Brooklyn, the Brooklyn Arts kind of university. And we had a Q&A, and lots of questions that were put. Yes, we've moved on, but things are just the same. I mean, in America, you've got Black Lives Matter. In the 80s, we had SUS, where basically it just gave the police officer who had a stereotype of a certain kind of person, that in that case was young black kids. You go with your girlfriend to the West End, they go into, buy something from Topshop or something, and you're outside talking to your brethren. The police can pick you up. And I know a couple of the members of the band that were taken into Borstal for just under suspicion. I believe, because I'm not in England much, but I believe that your new Prime Minister is bringing that back in, where you can be stopped just on suspicion. And this is what happens in America. America's, they've got guns. So when an officer of the law can work on a stereotype image, this is what we have, and that's what Black Lives Matter. So things have moved on, but they haven't changed because the status quo remains the same. And we'd spoken about the fact that they didn't, it'd been 39 years, and this movie was only just released in the United States. And this, an elderly woman, and I was having a conversation with her after. I was kind of speaking with Johnny Osborne, and I kind of said, hold on, Johnny, and I started speaking to her. And she said, it's the stabbing, why they wouldn't show it in America. So I said, what do you mean? I mean, that's impossible, because look at movies. You've got movies where people are getting their heads cut off, people getting shot, and it's in slow motion. And she said, quite simply, the underdog fights back. That was what the fear was in America. And it suddenly, after 39, 40 years, made me realize why it was.
Yeah, because I think that the reason that was given at the time as to why it couldn't get a release in the States in 1980 was because it was seen as being a provocation to whatever potential audience was likely to see it.
But just going back to your question, I think most people here can tell you about an incident or tell you about something that's in the movie that reminds them of something that they have witnessed, have experienced in the lives that we've lived from the 70s coming up to now.
I also think that we're talking about a period that's not too far away from the murder of Stephen Lawrence, which many people already know about. But to be a young black person on the streets in London, after the more conventional time, which is when a young black person is likely to be out and about because they're either going to a blues or coming back from a blues, maybe. The chances of you getting hassled around that period, either by, as in the case of Stephen Lawrence, fatally, by a white racist gang, or by racist police, were, it's something that, I was very shocked by it, but all my black friends said to me, if that's kind of how it is. That's how, you walk on the streets at 3 in the morning in London. That's what you've got to be prepared for.
Well, this is what I was saying earlier about Carl Hallman, sorry. Carl played Ronnie in the movie. He just said, no, this wouldn't happen. Police won't come into a dance and bring dogs. No, and he accused Franco and Martin of, you know, you're exaggerating. But if you think about it, go back to the 70s, and a lot of people didn't know anything about reggae. You know, now you can say the word reggae, and people are aware of it, people know. But in the early 70s, you said reggae, and it was only people who grew up with the sound system or knew anything about it. So, you know, a police officer saying, what are they doing on the street? Do you know what I mean?
Okay, yeah.
One question, what were the reactions when the movie was released? You know, because it's 1980.
Where in the UK?
Yeah, how was it
Yeah.
received when the film was first released?
Exactly.
Well,
I remember.
I remember going
Such a long
to
time ago.
in Brixton, I think it was, a movie, watching it in a movie with Brixton with all my friends there, and I found myself kind of slipping down. And the scene that I got ribbed up for the most is when we're in the lift and I'm mad at Ellie, and all my friends laughed and joked. I mean, it was just the first time that anything like that had been seen. You know, and it wasn't, if it was a major release, then people would have seen it. But Babylon has just been there. It's crept along. I remember one time they were on the internet, £250 for a copy that was taken from Channel 4. It's, you know, we've now kind of seen it, but it's taken 40 years for us to look at it and to identify it as what it was. This was a piece of film that, you know, I don't know how many people saw it when it first came out. That's a question. I mean, that just shows you there's about, you know, I can count it on my hands. And these are people who know that life. So they, you know, it was like, what's this film about? But, you know, in the 70s, no one would have seen the film. And this was the problem that the film had, because it couldn't really get the major release that it was really entitled to. But now, 40 years later, we're here talking about the movie.
Yes. Yeah.
I can imagine that the life of young kids with Afro-Caribbean background, it wasn't really represented in the media, on TV, in the movies. So how did that, what kind of impact had that on this generation of young
Well,
Afro-Caribbean?
I'm just going back to, if you go back to earlier times, right? When we said we wanted to play music, most of our parents would go, no man, you have to get a proper job. That was what we heard. You have to get a proper job. No, go and be a doctor or a lawyer. I mean, okay, let's go to Jamaica, which is the birthplace of the music. A Rasta couldn't walk into a hotel. Rasta, you couldn't happen. It wouldn't happen. And what really started to happen was when you had 12 tribes, probably, and you had a lot of the, well, certain musicians whose parents were ministers, do you know what I mean, finance ministers, or you had certain people of the middle class structure where their children became Rasta and were now, you know, their parents kind of went, well, I can't say them is a nasty setup, because they're sons and daughters. So it's, I think, to answer your question, if I say to some of my children now, we knew a time with we now know, and it's hard to just think about it. Can you really remember the time when there was no mobile phones? You know?
Yeah.
And yet there was raves, and somehow people would go to and call, and millions of people turned up. You know? But now you have the internet. Somehow we did it. Somehow, you know, we made it happen. And we can look back, but we still have that thought of what it was like then. And
Yeah.
this is what we have to look at. You know, I know we're sitting here and kind of going, well, what was it like? You know,
But there is a strange kind of continuity as well, Brinsley, because of, you know, the way the movie's been received in the States. The commentary that I've heard is that people are saying this speaks to how we are today in America. It hasn't, there's nothing, you know, very little has changed.
Yep.
Well,
The racism is still there.
See, the people in America are identifying with it. And I think it's done 100 and something cities right now. And, you know, it's education. It's education, and there are moments and things in the film that, as Martin said, people in America are identifying with it. They're saying, why didn't we see this before? Why haven't we seen it before? So,
well, I think, as they say in Jamaica, nothing's ever done before the time. And we've reached the time right now when we're going to put the platform over to you, good people. You can put your questions to our special guests, Brinsley, Forde, and Martin Stellman. So who would like to put the first question? Okay, there's one at the back. Microphone question right at the back.
Oh, it's like question time on the BBC.
I have a question for Martin. You worked on the film Quadrophenia, and there are some parallels between the two films in terms of how it switches from being quite comedic at times to comedic and humorous to quite shocking, you know, but particularly, you know, the scene with Carl Howman and so on. I was just wondering, because you said about how the actors had the freedom to add to their characters, you know, how much of those switches between humor and violence and, you know, and happy things and sad things was your touch as a writer, and how much of it is your willingness to let actors be themselves?
That's a really interesting question.
can I just say something to the person who just asked the question? I don't know if you know, but Martin wrote Quadrophenia. Okay. Yeah, I think
Okay. I think there are kind of two parts to the question, because you're talking about, you know, the role of the input of the actors on the written word, and how the two things, because there was a written script which had already had a kind of input from, as I said, from my kids who I was working with in the area, some of whom actually appear in the film. So Donovan, for example, who's no longer with us, unfortunately. And Sandra too was part of my group. So there'd already been a kind of fusion between what I was bringing to the table, as it were, and what you know, the kind of real people, if you like, were saying and wanting to say. And I think it was a complete two-way street. And I think it's about, there's a certain sort of spirit of flexibility. You have to be able to let stuff in. And sometimes on our part, you know, on Franco and my part, as the co-writers, you know, sometimes people might want to stray a little further away, or maybe not give you what you really need in terms of your story beats. There are certain things that need to be told in order to understand the audience. So, in order for the audience to understand what's going on. So, you know, it's a two-way street. Sometimes you have to pull people back a little bit and say, whoa, you know, maybe not that much, you know. And it's a kind of, it's a bit like a sort of orchestral thing. But in terms of your second half of your question, which is the comedy and, if you like, tragedy side, for the want of, you know, better description, I'd say that isn't that just like life? And I think that probably what we were. I think if you look at Mean Streets, it's very funny, you know, in places, and it's funny like life can be very, very funny and sometimes very, very tough and tragic. So I think, it wasn't deliberate. The comedy was not deliberate. We weren't trying to go for broad comedy.
Yeah,
you know?
I think to answer your question fully, as Martin said before, the structure was there. So they knew that that point was going to happen. But it's like, you have a curry goat and you have a curry goat. You know, you have ackee and saltfish and you have ackee and saltfish. One person's going to season it a certain way. And I think that's what the actors brought to it. It was already there. The structure was there. Like, for instance, there was one line that became one of the funniest things. David, who was actually the owner of one of the sound systems that played in the christening. No, it wasn't the christening. It was the engagement party. Yeah. And he said, "This going to take some negotiation, you know." Yeah. And it became, he just said it. And it became really funny. There was another one that oh gosh, his name's out of my head, but he was my stepfather, right? And we had this scene where it just went on and on. I couldn't stop laughing. He couldn't stop laughing. I don't know if you remember that scene. Where he said, "You don't control me." Yeah. And every time we did it, we went serious, and suddenly it would be, "You can't come." And we just burst out laughing. But in life, that's one of the things that we have. When we say we have swagger, although times are hard for us, we have a way of like Big U did a tune where he said, "Every nigger is a star." And that's what it is. So, you have a part to play, but everybody is going to carry his swagger in his own way. And that, I think, was one of the things that Martin and Franco allowed the actors to do. The structure's already there, because, as you said, if you don't have that structure, then the story falls apart. But each person was allowed to season his part in his own style and fashion,
Okay, thank you for that very intriguing and enlightening question. I think we have a next question here.
So what has allowed you to keep the fire burning for 40 years? Because if you didn't get the support in 1980 with this movie, it could have easily just died on the vine, you put it out. So what has kept it going, so that we've seen it today?
You're talking about Babylon, right? Yeah. Well, a complete happenstance, because these guys in New York called Kino Lorber, who are a kind of boutique distribution company, they said they were kind of looking around they're always looking around for movies to show that haven't had proper distribution, and they couldn't believe that Babylon had never had a proper release in America. Well,
it was Gabriel,
Gabriel,
another young Jewish boy, who was really the person that worked to get the movie done, and he did a lot of the work, a lot of the groundwork. But I think, in a word, it is the movie. It's what the movie says, because it wasn't like Franco and Martin and Gavrik. Gavrik is the producer, Gavrik Losey, let's mention him. I think the movie just, Channel 4 kept playing it. It became a cult movie. And I remember seeing it on the internet, as I said before, for £250. Because remember, you couldn't get this movie. It wasn't on DVD. I mean, at first it came out on I don't know how many people remember
a
a VHS, right? Yeah, VHS. And it's just, I think, the strength of the movie. It's just the story. I think the story, people identify with it, people love it, and keep bringing it back. And the same thing for Gabriel and Kindo Lorber. And it's because it's been shown in America now, people are taking, you know, but I think even in Rototom about 4 or 5 years ago, they showed the movie here.
That's right.
It's an English movie. I mean, there's really nothing else like it, you know? So I think the movie and the truth in the movie speaks for itself.
Indeed. So I think we've got time for one last question. Do we have who would like to put the last question to our special guest before we bring this session to a close? Now is your chance. Do not be shy. Do we have one last question? Oh, there we go.
Hello, 1 2 1 2. Greetings, Brother Brinsley. Brother Bovell sends his love. I was just speaking to him, yeah. I'm not sure if this question was asked before because I've just sat down. But will there be a reforming of the original Aswad band so them can tour and come a Rototom next time and do the thing?
Well, the question is, we never say never. You know what I mean? Never say never. When the right time comes, we'll be there. Unlike many bands who break up, we have no animosity against each other. We had just parted, and Dennis Brown. Actually, let me tell you, we did the Dennis Brown tribute, but let me tell you a story. Island 50th, right? I was working with Sly and Robbie. I heard that Drummy and Tony were going to do. And I called them, I said, come on, man, you know what I mean? We have to represent. So they set up a rehearsal in Shepherd's Bush. And while we were there for a couple of hours rehearsing. And Robbie, right, I'm talking about Robbie Shakespeare, bass player, called me outside. And Robbie said, the whole of Ireland said, I'm going to have to separate you guys, right? Because people have the opinion that, you know, because we're not working together, you know, that something is terrible or we can't work together. So when the right time comes, you will see Aswad. Hopefully we'll do an album and come on and do a world tour. So when the time comes.
Fantastic. Just to remind, tomorrow we'd like to see you all back here at 5:30 p.m. We will be having a very special session with Marcia Griffiths. So do not miss it. And once again, please put your hands together to give a special round of applause for Brinsley, Forde, and Martin Stellman.
What is she doing? Is she doing all